And then hopefully this one works. I think it's working. Right, welcome to another episode of Beta Talk. I'd like to thank my guild patrons who support me in my podcast and also my newsletter that you can find on betateach.co.uk. And my guild patrons are Payaka, Wolsey, Primary Pro, UK Radiators, Cast Rads, and SB Group. So thank you very much to them. So today I'm joined by two of my friends from the industry. We've already had a bit of a giggle before we've come on. I've just explained I've got some new podcast gear, so hopefully it's all working properly. And I have got the dog. I look after my next door neighbour's dog sometimes if I'm working from home, and it's asleep on my lap and it will snore. So maybe the microphone's going to pick that up. I don't know. So we're
I
joined
mean,
by Bean.
it's already nodded off. It doesn't wait for us to say things. It's already
He's
it's
bored
voted with
already.
its.
He's bored already. So we've got Bean Beanland. All my listeners, I should imagine, will know Bean, and we've got Emma Bowen, and I should imagine all my listeners know Emma. And that we're here today to talk about the merger. The Heat Pump Association merged with the Sorce Heat Pump Association and Bean's Heat Pump Federation, now called Heat Pump Association UK. So we're going to chat about that merger, how that's going, and we'll probably diverse onto sort of current topics. I mean, we're all very good talkers in this industry, so we probably will divert off here, there, and everywhere. So, welcome to the show, guys. Hope you're all well. How have you all been?
Yeah, good. Really, just cracking on. Still here. That's the main thing, isn't it? Yeah, no, it's okay. Sun is shining. Heating season's nearly over.
I
Fingers crossed.
know. Well, I was just saying to Bean, this
So
year's gone quick, hasn't it? Very
super
quick.
quick, super quick. Yeah, so I'm all good. Yeah.
So we had the merger. Now that 19th of January with the official. Was that the official date it merged? Have I got that right?
Technically, 1st of January,
All right.
but we went live, legally 1st of January. We went live on the 19th, and we've got the new website, which will reflect all of the updated changes and what have you. Is currently very close to launch. So we'll all feel much more comfortable, I think, once we've got all the new branding, everything's in place, new website to point to. And then we can start building the additional content that we've got planned for said website, which includes things like a really robust library of case studies, particularly for commercial and industrial, which has always been a bit of the sort of poor relation. So we'll be doing everything we can to make sure that the levels of awareness around commercial industrial and public sector, which is the side of the industry that I now look after, starts to get some real shout.
So when you say case studies, what of installation work?
Yeah, indeed. So I mean, this doesn't it's not limited just to the commercial end of the sector. We'll be looking to build a good case study library for domestic as well. But there's much more.
Bean,
There's
you're
much
right.
more out there.
You're
There's
rivaling
much.
me again. When you did a podcast not so long ago, that my listeners, because when I started my podcast, it was just me. There's about seven now, and obviously I do case studies on my newsletter. So,
Yeah. So there's lots of data available. And for me, a case study has to have data. If it doesn't have data, it's just a product flyer. So it needs to have data. And of course, we've now got several entities collecting much more robust data from domestic installs than we've ever done before.
mm,
The sort of quasi independent one would be Glyn and Tristan's
yeah,
Open Monitor, which is great. They've now got over 250 systems which have done more than a full 12 months.
yeah.
So you've got a full year's data. So that's really good. And I've actually just made use of some of that data in pulling up some responses to Dale Vince's most recent pronouncements. And you'll have noticed last week that, again, in response to that, Octopus have now published the data, made the data available from their fleet of the Cozy machines, and it's data that makes the big difference. So we've got lots of data coming out of the domestic side, very little really coming out from the commercial and industrial
Right.
side yet, and that's where we'll be making a real push to try and get some serious case studies put together in various market sectors. So It could be care homes, it could be hospitals, it could be schools, doesn't matter. Um, in order to broaden the levels of understanding that we see amongst sort of consultants and specifiers, because at the moment I think that there's still a lack of knowledge about where the heat pump sector's got to. I've addressed two or three audiences since the merger, and when I've said to them that 165 degrees is now routine with off-the-shelf product, and we've got some products that will do 200 degrees and will do steam at 5 bar, they all fall off their chairs because they had absolutely no idea.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like so as the Ground Source Heat Pump Association, we often pushed back against the more recent view that heat pump means air source heat pump, and actually it encompasses water and ground. And again, when we're talking heat pumps in general, then the view is that it's domestic, whether that's air source, ground source, and there's a lot more to heat pumps. And I think that's one of the strengths of the merged organization is bringing in people like Bean and others who were previously sat with the HPF or the GSHPA doing a more industrial commercial view of the world.
Mm. Get that octopus data then, is that like open source like the Tristan and Glyn do? Is it that kind of thing?
Yeah, they've published a dashboard. So if
Yeah.
you go onto the Octopus website now, you can you can find the dashboard in the same way that MCS Landscapes has their dashboard for the MCS data set. Same thing published now by Octopus, and I think that was prompted. I suspect they would have done it anyway, but it was certainly prompted by the Evan Davis radio program last week where we had Dale Vince and Greg Jackson sitting on opposite sides of the room, shall we say, debating efficiencies. And I think the really important thing that comes out of that, and this is what we've tried to stress to journalists for some time now, is that fixating on the worst day performance in the middle of winter is completely irrelevant because it's annual performance, average annual performance, so seasonal performance factor, SCOP if you prefer, not quite the same, but similar. That's what drives the operational cost. And of course, for most consumers, it's the operational cost that's important. And so when journalists would come to me and say, "Bean, we're going to write a piece about how terribly expensive it is to run a heat pump in the middle of winter," I'd say, well, that's fine, but actually, that's a sort of pointless piece of journalism because that's not what fixes the price that the consumer pays to run the heat pump for a full year.
Funny old fish journalists, aren't they?
Well, they're getting there. I mean, I went through a phase where I'd sort of stopped talking to journalists because I didn't think we were getting anywhere. They weren't really, listening. But in the end, I came round to the opposite view and said, actually, if we don't engage, they're going to write things anyway. Much better that we engage and we try and build relationships where we can. Some journalists, of course, much more receptive than others, but I think we're doing a pretty good job now in terms of building some really sound relationships with journalists who have a serious platform and those who really do reflect the fact that the energy transition is coming. One way or another, there is going to be change. And you'll remember Don Hubert's quotation that was frequently attributed elsewhere. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stone, and the oil age won't end because we run out of oil.
Go back to Dale Vitz. I'm going to try and get him on the show. I know he's heat pump engineer. I know he's publican as well. He comes from the area I grew up in. I probably would have raved with him back in the 90s because he was part of the New Age Traveller movement, I think, back in the day. So the merger has happened. That now makes you quite a big organisation. I was having a little look at the website today. I mean, you've got 24 executive members. I think you've nearly got now 80 full members and then 24 associates. So you're possibly the biggest sort of entity now in our sector. I mean, I'm at the House of Lords tomorrow. I think some event at the House of Lords for the Sustainable Energy Association, but I mean they're quite big. I don't think they're as big as you, are they? And the HHIC, historically a very big organisation within the heating sector back in the days when no one was looking at the heating sector. So the heating sector got away with whatever it wanted to get away with. But you guys are a big group now,
Yeah,
aren't
what you don't also see on the website is the number of installer members we've now got.
you?
So one of the additional benefits from the merger was that, as you're probably aware, the Federation had done a deal with MCS to provide an opportunity for small installers to contribute to the industry by taking what we called affiliate membership. And that affiliate program had built up to sort of 250 odd members. And all of that program has moved across to in the merger. So actually, we've got, as an organization, we're comfortably over 400. And I don't know what the latest number is, but as that side builds, in terms of representing businesses as a whole, which of course is what Treasury is really interested in. They want to see the number of businesses you represent and therefore the number of jobs that you've got sitting behind you. And then, of course, you add in the supply chain. That's what's starting to give us the ability to really make progress in Westminster in a way that we hadn't previously been able to do.
Yeah, the review that was, we had been echoing around those corridors of power for a while was that, you've got an industry that in their view was quite niche and specialist, but then with three different organizations to talk to with the HPA, GSHPA and the HPF. And so, we answered the call by doing what felt the most natural was to combine our various skill sets and our membership groups to be able to have that bigger voice and to represent the whole of the heat pump sector, whether that's resi or commercial, whether that's training, whether that's installers, whether that's manufacturers, all the ancillary products in and around it, because it is as a whole that we need the people in power or who want to be in power to realise the opportunities and, as Bean says, the jobs that they currently represent and that will represent in the future and the economic value of this sector as a whole now and in the future.
I mean, so let's pick, because obviously the engineers are arguably who I'm sort of concerned about, just sole traders, SMEs, it's really hard work out there. Well, as you will know, Emma, and you've been, it's really hard out there. I don't think people realise how hard it can be.
You mustn't forget that I was an installer once.
Yeah, yeah.
Long time ago.
And we've
I've
just
been
been
there.
talking about
I've
your
been there.
old
I've
work
got the
history
t-shirt.
of doing all that lovely woodwork for all them lovely cars back in the day, Aston
Yeah.
Martins and.
Yeah.
So engineers obviously are very, very important to me, and so just to put it out there, so Damon is your sort of the representative for the installer community, and he actually, I'm good friends with Damon. Damon's like me, says how he's very honest, and he absolutely is loving working with the heat pump. So and all you sort of the senior leadership team, I suppose, if you call it that, Charlotte, and he's been so amazed how hard working you all are. Now, obviously, there's things as this industry grows. There's lots of things we need to do, and I'd like to know if the engineers have actually got quite a powerful voice, because you've got now some of the most powerful entities on the planet in your this is so. And I suppose one of the questions I like is who came up with the idea Heat Pump Association UK, because when I say you've got some of the biggest players, so it's interesting for me. So like your executive members, they've got the big four boiler companies, and you've obviously got some of the big heat pump manufacturers that have been around a long time, sort of involved in the air-to-air stuff, like where my family comes from. But then you've got your full members. You've also got some energy companies now, obviously as executive members. Interestingly, Octopus aren't an executive member; they're the full member. But then when you go down to your associates, two of the biggest entities, I think, on this planet who have got the buying power to go and buy some of your executive members, like your Valents, and they are looking, because Valent are interested in a lot of people at the moment, because arguably they're the sort of the most successful domestic heat pump entity out there, and people want to buy them, and them conversations are going on. So it interests me because you've got the different business cultures all coming together. You've got American boardrooms, Japanese, Chinese, Germans. So the voice of you as an association, are the engineers going to be heard?
Yeah, I mean, it was really, 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 really important on the way in to the merge for the installer and the people on the coalface to be represented, and that was roundly heard by everybody. Bean and the HPF and the GSHPA were specifically, we must represent the installers. And you know me, Nathan. I sit here as a bigger small company, often representing people who run businesses on their phones, and the ability for me to attend some of those meetings, it is great. But being able to then have somebody like Damon who can have and there's a dedicated WhatsApp group, which is something that I thought, it's so simple, but everybody uses those kind of communication channels now. So there's a
Yeah,
dedicated WhatsApp group where, anybody who's got any issues can come and present those to Damon. Other people in the group can discuss how they may overcome them. But essentially, if that issue is loud enough to warrant, somebody going to do something about it, then, Damon is the person who's getting through those doors now to take, so it's not just kind of me, oh, I managed to get into a Desnes meeting, let me go and, be loud at Emma Bowen, banging the installer door. Damon's now got the title that says HPA UK. And by the way, I've had the opinions potentially of 250, 300 other installers in the industry, and they are all telling me this is an issue. And so,
mm,
what are we going to do about it? So,
mm,
it's very much a place where installers are being listened to, where there is a dedicated person who is taking their concerns on board. The meetings that are organised for the installer forum outside of the WhatsApp group, I've been to all of them since they started, and they're really well run. And one of the big things that I like about it as an installer is it starts off with "you said we did," which I'm a doer. So, you actually get to see, at the last meeting, the installers said something needed to be done about this, and this is what Damon's done in the meantime. Like, these are the people he's met. These are the things that he's said. This is what, the action that's come of rather than it just being like a massive grumbling talking shop, things are actually being put forward in the right places. And again, to have a representation that enables the installers to have a dedicated person who can get to those tables, I think is a real, game changer for the people at the coalface.
yeah. I think he's brilliant. I mean, before, I mean, obviously, I wasn't part of that voting process because I'm not a member, but I remember having a chat with Charlotte and saying that Damon is up for it because he's an interesting character. Damon is obviously younger than us, but he and he likes being young. Lots of young men like going out and having a great time, don't they? But he's so in tune with this industry, and he's such a great engineer. He really is. Loves learning, constantly learning, and is helping others learn from him as well. But no, I think that aspect of it is really, really good. And you said, Bina, that was because it was MCS who started this membership of. Well,
So
Heat Pump Federation had engineer
yeah,
members.
so the heat pump. So what we did, and yeah, I mean, this sort of goes back into the sort of history of the three entities. But from the MCS perspective, they wanted to be able to to come up with something that allowed small installers to be represented, but felt that it had to be done within an organisation that was completely heat pump archetype neutral. So we have obviously Ground Source Heat Pump Association, Ground Source, Heat Pump Association, which at the time, I don't think it's unfair to say that at the time, lots of people considered it to be the Domestic Air Source Heat Pump Manufacturers Club. And so from the MCS perspective, I'm putting words into their mouth here, of course, but my understanding is that they viewed the Federation as being a neutral party, and therefore it was an appropriate place to try and kickstart the installer representative in a significant way. And so being able to carry that across and build and develop it in the way that Emma has so eloquently described, where we've got genuine opportunities for peer-to-peer learning. Whereas previously those sorts of things have happened on Facebook or where it is, but there's now an opportunity for installers, to share problems. And Nathan, as you know from some of our own history, I'm a great one for not airing problems in public.
Mm.
because the only winners actually the fossil fuel sector. If we've got problems, and we have got problems, we're like every other industry, we've got problems. But the way to address those is through peer-to-peer learning. And for installers, potentially some who are new and maybe not have the experience to be able to see where the very best engineers are doing fantastic work, how they're doing it, what products they're using, what techniques they're using. You'll know that there's lots of debate about joints or pipe bending going on. I'd like to think that more installers are doing a bit more pipe bending because they're seeing that debate going on. We've got there's been a particular debate about external insulation, so the pipe work on external installations, getting from the monoblock into the building, all those sorts of things. I think if engineers see the peer-to-peer advice and exchange and guidance, that's a massive bonus. And for me, that's one of the significant new features within the industry that the mergers enabled us to bring, because it's given us some scale that means that we can now dedicate resources to the various different things. So previously, and Emma would know this because, we used to turn up to various meetings, whether it's government or Ofgem or somebody else, and there would be someone from the HPA, someone from the GSHPA, someone from the Heat Pump Federation. We'd all be saying the same thing, but now we can spread our effort across so much more and achieve that much more, because instead of trebling up in sessions, we can provide dedicated resources, which is, I'd say, for the first time, we've got dedicated resources for commercial, industrial, and public sector, which we've never had before. So, the installers are getting their, what is at last a fair crack at having a say within the industry within which they make their living. And of course, lots of arms of government like that, because at the end of the day, yes, this is about the energy transition, but also it's about good quality jobs, good quality employment. And, you and Emma, you and I, we all know that our industry does actually have some seriously good potential to provide great career opportunities for young people. We've just got to get that message out there, that for what are now the generations of digital natives coming through, everything is thumbs for children these days, and they're even pointing with their thumbs now. I mean, the genetics is moving really, really fast. You used to have to wait for, sort of 1,000 years for things to change, but now kids are pointing with their thumbs because they're so used to doing this.
We'll have to check if my daughter does that now. I've never known.
That sort of digitalization of everything, drops neatly into what we do, because everything we do, it's all electric, it's internet connected, it's got all those features that young people are just growing up with, and just for them, it's just nature, it's just natural. And so the appeal of the sector, I think, if we can get the messaging right, is tremendous. And of course, getting people in young, being able to train them really early, get them into good habits really early, has enormous advantages, not only for the industry itself, but for the consumers, of course.
Well, the peer-to-peer learning is very important. I'm going to take credit because I'm probably one of the main ones that actually. So peer-to-peer learning has gone on for years. You mentioned the Stone Age earlier, so people chatting around a campfire, discussing what's the best way to pull down a woolly mammoth is peer-to-peer learning. It's naturally happened for years and years. But the whole reason I started Beta Teach is based around a 2005 study by Dylan William, Paul Black, and some others, where they noticed in education, if you activate people as learning resources for one another, it has a very high effect on learning. And activating people as self-directed learners as well. And that's what I founded Beta Teach on. And I had Adam on the show, who obviously was using peer-to-peer learning, but didn't know it was called that. So, yeah, I mean, it's just a sensible thing for good engineers to want to do. I mean, it's always happened as well. You used to have the SIFI groups, local regional groups years ago when I was growing up, and people would come together and chat about what best practice is. But then it kind of sort of did attenuate over the years as this industry grew very big. Because the industry did grow very big. We became the world's biggest market for gas boilers up until 2016. And that peer-to-peer learning got lost. And I'd argue back in the day, associations were a bit of a problem in causing that. So I am a big critic of the HHRC, who've got lovely, lovely people in it and lovely brands within it, but they kind of left us all behind. it was all about sustainability meant to them, sustaining sales and KPIs, because if you become the biggest in the world, you've got to sustain that. We're still the biggest in Europe. And of course, obviously, your association now has become massive. I mean, have you got this unified voice yet then? I mean, the analogy is, isn't it, you because I remember the energy companies, well, one of the big energy companies got hold of me just before COVID and said, can you tell us, Nathan, about the Heat Pump Federation, Ground Source Heat Pump Association and the Heat Pump Association, because we're all going to Parliament, wherever you all go, Parliament, and you've got the hydrogen lobby group who are extremely slick. We're all going electrification. Or they said, we're all going electrification, but the disjointed voice we're hearing from the other lobbying is disjointed. And they wanted me to sort of give them a bit of a independent rundown off record of why that might be. So one part of my brain thinks it's completely logical to bring everyone together to the table. That makes absolute sense. But the other side of my brain is curious, because you've got some very, very big multinational players now who want their own agendas. Why wouldn't they? That's business. They're extremely competitive. They're huge competitors. So, I mean, with this unified voice, is it still going to be the one with the larger checkbook that has the loudest voice? Or are the engineers going to be able to filter in their input, which I think is going to happen? Because, like you say, you've got this, we all respect the engineers. I hope everyone out there does. I know my listeners do. Their voice is probably the most important. They're having problems at the moment. Some of the biggest players out there, one minute they're big and the engineers love them. Next minute, they've completely changed their business structure and they're not supporting the engineers as well as they could be. And Emma, you run business, that you'd know all about that. So I do like this aspect of the engineers being able to feed in their input, because I think that's going to be very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer, Nathan. The revolution can't be delivered without the engineers. It doesn't matter how big your checkbook is and what your strategy is for selling boxes. That box needs to be unpacked and that box needs to be installed, and that doesn't happen without the engineers. And I do think that right now, given the view of the world politically, and the potential for changing our attitudes towards climate change, being part of somebody who can open those doors, and those doors are open. I was personally down as with the HPA UK, meeting with Desnes, discussing issues not issues, things that had been put out in the Warm Homes Plan, where clarification was being asked for by the installers, whether that was on the 0% loans, some clarification around the SSES if you were a manufacturer, and when this metering was coming in, some clarification around refrigerant. So there's other things. I mean, these are not my bag. Don't get me wrong. I'm an installer, and they'll figure out whether this refrigerant is going to last or not. But there is people in the industry who need to know that, and the same with the metering. The SSES metering. Am I overly bothered, when they are going to start sticking meters onto heat pumps so that they can monitor its energy use every 2 minutes? No, I just need to know that a heat pump that I can buy has it, if that's what's legally or regulatory required, and if it's the best for my customers. But those things are important to people in the industry, and they are being represented. And so to be round that table, taking issues around domestic, industrial and commercial directly to the people who are dealing with that in the Department of Energy Net Zero, for me is exactly why the association exists, and again, to see items on that agenda that were driven by the installer base again, that for me is exactly the kind of leadership I want from an organization that's getting my dollar.
Well, I'm
Just
thinking, go on, Ben. Yeah.
No, I was just going to pick up on the point you made about some very, very large businesses now involved, and we, this was something that came up very, very early in the life of the federation, because our sort of core starting membership were people like Centrica and Octopus, and what was very clear is that whilst those businesses had much, much better access to government than we did at the time, when they spoke to government, and they were very open about this, when they go and speak to government, it's a vested interest because it's the company talking to government. They said, when we have a trade representative body and they talk to government, it's the industry talking to government, and it's not seen as a vested interest. And so, for that reason, yes, they wanted the collective voice so that they could have that further channel, and of course, they wanted to be able to influence the collective voice. But the very fact that they were all prepared to come together in a single room and collectively decide what that messaging needed to be, I think was fundamental because they had also recognised that change, real change, that was going to bring about a genuine transition in the way that we view energy in the UK. And bear in mind, this is a very, very significant transition. As Owen Davis says, it's like going from horses to cars. It's like going from outdoor plumbing to indoor plumbing. I mean, these are massive. Having national sewage systems. I mean, these are massive. This is a massive transition, and so it's really vitally important that we have everybody sitting in our effectively what is our big supply chain, large voice, small voice, and the collective. We go back to the installers. The collective of the installer forum does mean that they now do have a genuine say in what happens around their trade bodies table in a way that I don't think they had certainly prior to 2020 because it just wasn't strong enough, and we see the importance of enabling those voices even amongst consumers as well, because there is now genuine recognition that if we can identify the consumer community champions, that they do a lot of the work within their own communities. And I've seen this happen myself when I've been talking to community groups. The one or two people in a village will identify themselves, and they will start doing the messaging around the energy transition within their communities. And there's a lot of academic research that demonstrates this very clearly works. When government was saying you should insulate your loft space and we'll give you the materials for free, nobody did it. And when the big electricity supplier said you should insulate your loft space, nobody did it. But when John down the street, who had been enabled by the electricity supply companies, went to the neighbours and said, you know what, we should all do some insulation in our loft space, uptake went up 40%.
Mm. That's a nice thing about the energy transition. It's engendering communities, because obviously we all grew up in an era, didn't we? Where I grew up in villages in Norfolk. My mum knew everyone, everyone knew my mum. But communities have dissipated and been lost, haven't they? Which I think's sad. We are social animals, humans, and we need community. And I think the energy, like you've done a lot of speaking at these community interest sort of groups around sort of the energy, and they're very passionate people, aren't they, Ben?
They are, and one of the messages that goes down really, really well with those community groups, and we're addressing community groups now at the rate of about once every 10 days. One of the things that they really like is the messaging that says, if we choose to take it, there are massive opportunities within this energy transition to do some serious social good. And there are one or two examples, that pop up from time to time. And by and large, most communities buy into this idea that actually there is an opportunity here to do some social good. So I think that, that combination of messaging makes a difference at all levels, whether it's with installers within our organization or whether it's with, individuals in communities, that concept that actually we've got a chance to do some serious good news here if we choose to take this opportunity. And of course, the more we talk about it, the more likely we are to take this opportunity and to get away from the sort of, well, as you say, the sort of insular view. We've all become a bit more insular. We've got the neighbourhood concept has struggled a bit, I think, and there's lots of people better qualified to discuss why that's happened other than me. But I do think that within community energy discussions now, getting opportunities for community ownership of assets, whatever it might be, community ownership of wind farms, community ownership of solar, all those things, that does have the potential to start to bring us back together again, particularly, I think, probably in more rural communities.
Mm, yeah. Now, before I forget, I saw a post by the Heat Pump Association UK recently about a memorandum of understanding with SIBSI. So I suppose that's all to do with the fact you're very much moving into commercial, industrial, and not just domestic. Um, and then, but I wanted to come back. So this unified voice, what would you say for the listeners is the main messages you're trying to get through to government as a trade?
Uh,
It's because it almost feels, I'm laughing, Nathan, because it almost feels like it's still the same bloody message. We're just saying it a bit louder and rather than having three, small, kids party style megaphones, we've now got a really big one. But the messaging has got to be around the decarbonisation of heating, whether that's domestic, industrial, or commercial, is one of the biggest ways that we're going to get those net zero targets and meet our Paris, legally binding agreements. And that to do that, the market needs supporting, and it needs supporting along the lines of things that we have seen happen, but that we've been wanting for ages. The warm homes plan, the future home standard that's come out today, all of those things that are going to drive the general public and business owners to transition from fossil fuels. So it's kind of, business as usual, but with a bigger megaphone. And I think with a more, in the HPA UK, with a wider variety of industry voices around the table. So it's not viewed as like a one box solution. If Bean was not wrong to say that the perception of the HPA was the, air source heat pump manufacturers club at one point. It absolutely was. And so if you've got that kind of view as the view round the table, then of course ground source heat pumps don't really get the positive view from the government side, because they're not really what's being talked about, because that organisation's representing, the majority of their people who are pushing air source. And yet what we know is that the ground source side of the industry has the ability to deliver some of the biggest transitions in public sector buildings and in those commercial and industrial processes that have not necessarily been thought of as, standard heat pump territory. With the changes that have happened in the technology, those things that will have been, completely discounted and are still oftentimes overlooked because they're misunderstood like some kind of dark art. But they are the no-brainer situation for, those high-rise blocks of flats, for, more networked heat solutions, for, as I say, industrial and commercial processes, now that we've got units that can, stick out 200 degrees, whereas, the view it's low flow 35, 45 degree temperature. If you didn't have that knowledge within an organization, you're not going to have that conversation, and it's going to be discounted before it even gets to the table of anybody talking about it in terms of supporting those types of technologies and those types of projects.
Have you two had a chance to sort of dig through the future home standard yet?
No.
well, there's much of it has been flagged, hasn't it,
Mm,
for
mm.
a long time. So I won't necessarily be rushing to read it cover to cover today. I'm actually very interested in some of the other things that have come out today that probably aren't getting the headlines. The headlines are being centered around, every home will have a heat pump by 2028, no more gas connections for new build by then. The level of PV, I think, is higher than some people had thought it was going to be. We've obviously got this news on the same day about the plug-in solar, the availability of plug-in solar, but buried in one of the pronouncements was this issue about making available low-cost, low-carbon electricity rather than paying curtailment costs to wind farm and solar operators when we've got excess generation on the grid. Well, that's really interesting because we and some of our members, one or two of our members particularly, have been raging against the concept of paying curtailment funds, huge sums of money, to operators of renewable generation wind and solar, to effectively switch off their capability because we can't move the electricity around fast enough. Yeah, if we can start delivering that to large-scale heat networks, industrial users who have the ability to make use of that electricity when it's available and store it in thermal with thermal storage, whatever it is, that has started to open a door which has hitherto been completely closed. And those sorts of things that we've been chipping away at, and you and Emma both know this. We've all of us had various soapboxes which we've been pulling out for time to time over the last 20 years. And you do feel sometimes you're having conversations that you were having 20 years ago, and you're still having them. And the obvious one is about the price of electricity. But you do have to bring these soapboxes out, and you have to keep bashing away. It takes a long time to get serious change. We have to bear in mind that it took us, 30 odd years to get 80% penetration or thereabouts with central heating. So this is going to take a long time, and we do have to then be able to be in a position to counter some of the negatives. Why is the UK doing this? We're only 1% of global emissions. Well, that may be true, but as Chris Stark says, if by taking a position of leadership with our 1%, we persuade all the other countries in the world who are also 1%, we'll actually have done 30% of the work. You start sort of having those sorts of things, that starts to create change and give you opportunities to bring everybody along with you. Because one of the challenges here is to make sure that this transition is done with people, not to people. The Brits we're pretty resistant to people telling us what to do. We like to think it's all going to be our own idea and that we're going to want to do it of our own accord. And we only do that when we're presented with opportunities and good reasons to do things. Here is a set of good reasons to do things, whether it's economic, and for most people, of course, particularly now with challenges, the financial challenges that most people are facing, it has to wash its face. And so we do have to get to a point where the lowest carbon heat is also the lowest cost heat. And once we've got to that point, then people will start making the decision of their own accord. And that when we get to that point, we really will have made it. And we're there already if people are able to combine all the technologies. If a homeowner can have a heat pump, PV on the roof, a battery, a time of use tariff, they are going to make considerable savings. Clearly, that's going to have cost implications, capital cost implications. One of the reasons why we've now got the low and zero interest rate loans included in the Warm Homes Plan, so that people can top up their boiler upgrade scheme grant. We need the details on those loans, and we need them reasonably quickly so that we can get on and start making use of all this stuff. Because if you can paint that story to homeowners, there was an example on the BBC's reporting today of a homeowner who'd got a heat pump, he'd got solar, he'd got the battery. He was doing very nicely, thanks very much. Yeah, it had cost him to put it in, but his outcome was tremendous. And of course, he said, my house has never been so warm.
So with this large unified voice you've got, and you're going to government, and that, is there still this opposing voice, and is that still quite a large pain in the rear side?
Yeah, of course. There are lots of people who, for their own reasons, don't seem to want the transition to go ahead. You hear these voices all the time, and whether it's a fossil fuel voice or people who have other barrows they particularly want to push. But I mean, I don't know what their rationales are. You'll have to ask them. But it does seem to me to be very odd, and in some instances, sort of immoral to say, well, we know that we've got these technologies now, but we're not going to use them because it's all a bit too expensive and a bit hard. We'll just make our kids pay for it and our grandchildren pay for it. That seems to be a bit immoral, and it does. I think it's incumbent on us to start. We've got to make a start. We're clearly not going to do it all, are we? And I when I talk to school children, school groups, have to say to them, look, I must confess, I think my generation is going to let you down because I don't think we're going to do enough. But we have to make a start. And I don't want to get on a moral high horse here. I'm not on a moral crusade. But I do think that there is an absolute recognition from enough people now that burning things isn't a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, this is the thing, isn't it? It's just that I don't want to make it sound like some kind of weird conspiracy theory, but I don't think it's that, we're sat at one end of the table with some, gas, fossil fuel association at the other end of the table going, don't listen to them, they're rubbish, they're talking crap, it's over here, fossil fuels for the future. But I do think that the voice, if you like, is something that's just part of what we live with now, which is like the algorithm, isn't it? It's like, this view of social media and various parts of it that are saying, they're going to force you to take your gas boiler. The heat pumps are rubbish. They're expensive, and then it's like a sticky, vicious rumor that just kind of won't go away. And I think with the best will in the world, even if you had the most unbiased civil servants and government officials, they are still part of, the society we're living in. And, it's heard. And it's as much about going to the table and saying, kind of don't believe that hype. It's rubbish. This is the real story over here. And so, once you get those people, at the top of the tree to understand, the wood from the trees and the myths from the crap, sorry, the myths from the good, and how these things do work, and you can show them, and you can take them to people's projects, and you can show them case studies and introduce them to community groups and clients who've had these products, and get them to realize that actually there is all this misinformation out there and not everything that you're reading about it is true. Then that just helps them to make up their own mind, and realize that actually, if I'm going to be in this position in this particular group or in this particular debate in Parliament, or thinking about legislation for the future, then I should be making the decision based on the facts that are being presented to me, rather than the fact that somebody in the Daily Mail has written a piece that says a man's got to insulate his house with cardboard because it's too cold.
I mean, is that this opposing voice though? Is it distinctive or is it blurred? Is it because obviously, I'm going to push on this point that some of your biggest players are possibly going to be the same people that still want boilers.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
yeah, I
look,
mean,
what's the
I don't disagree, but the thing is, like with anything, isn't it? It's the same with the EV side. If we were going to look at that industry, the people who are churning out EVs still churning out, a gas model, and until they're forced to not, have, a diesel or an unleaded model, and that's on the cards, they're gonna play both sides of the fence. That's just business, and out with, you could say, oh well, morally maybe you should stop doing that, or I wouldn't do that if it was mine. If you're a 2 billion yen business or euro business, and half of that's coming from gas, you are going to, as a business person, take every opportunity you can to do that. But interestingly, that the bigger players in that market, the Worcester Bosches, the Valents, the Ideals, the Baxes, they're not running away from it and going, never, we're gas till we die. They've seen the writing on the wall, and they are making massive strides, some bigger than others, to run to the future. And we saw it with the EV line. It was interesting when the government rolled back on the end of the combustion engine, that the kind of car manufacturing people went, what are you doing? We're set for it now. We've got plans and everything, Stop messing with the plans, Stan. And I think, this is what we're missing still. And hopefully, the HBA UK, will, well, they will be part of answering the question, but nobody wants the algorithm to pick up that this government or any government or is going to force you, as being said. Nobody wants to be forced in the UK to take the gas boiler off the wall, but it would be nice to, hear that an end date is coming. because once you get that, they will follow. It's like Coca-Cola being told they can't put it in a plastic bottle anymore by 2030. Then the plastic bottle would be off the R&D, and glass would be in, or another. We need somebody who's keeping to bang on to the legislation and the people that make the plans to show them the way, and then everybody else will follow. You're not going to keep making horse and carts when the Model T's rolled down the road, are you?
We're going back to
Yeah,
cars again, Ben.
interesting you mentioned Coca-Cola there, because one of the things I think will come into play. I don't think we're quite there yet, but there's this sort of unwritten thing about license to operate. And this isn't a license to operate that's granted by the government. This is a license that's granted by the public. And the license to operate was the first sort of big example was the smoking thing. That now there's a tendency for people to say, "Oh, someone's smoking," and the big drinks companies thought that the next big target was likely to be alcohol. As it was, actually, it was sugar. And what we saw was the big brands running around the world, buying up every low sugar, low calorie drinks business that they could acquire, because they didn't want to lose their license to operate from the public, because they were not seen to be doing enough to protect children from high sugar content drinks and what have you. And I think that eventually we will get to the point where the license to operate concept starts to work with fossil fuels, that there will be this sort of, oh, actually, we've moved away from that. We've now recognized that we shouldn't be doing that. And the public mood will start to shift. And as I say, I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think it will come. And that concept of license to operate from the consumer
Mm.
is a thing.
Yeah,
And
and
again,
it comes down to kind of
there are
David the Pub,
academics
doesn't it? Or John,
there
it's
are academics
David.
out there who will talk to you till you've had enough about how this works. But yeah, again, we've seen it work before, and I'm pretty confident that it'll start to work in our sector as well.
Yeah, because it gets back to the community, Dave in the pub or John the community evangelist, isn't it? Because there was at one point that Dave in the pub was like jeered at because he'd bought an EV, and then now John's on his own because he's the only one who's still got a diesel, and everybody else is like, why haven't you made the transition? Well, you've got an EV now. And that license to operate again, we haven't seen the outright ban of plastics, but literally every single major brand is doing something in that bag, because everybody, well, anybody, people who've got a conscience or a thought about the planet are really saying, oh, I don't want to buy that, look how much plastic. It never ceases to be amazing when you see the one banana in a plastic bag or whatever. Then we are seeing them having to transition, because we are leaving the bananas in the plastic bag for the one that we can just peel off and take away in its own little bag that it was born in.
Yeah, I'm getting this close now to taking all my shopping out of its plastic containers and taking the containers back to the shop I bought them from, and saying, "There you go, you can have all this back." Because actually, I wanted what was in it. I didn't want the bit. So I do think that we are approaching a tipping point in this respect, where people are beginning to recognise actually things have to change. And look, there are plenty of people for whom this is a challenge. It's an affordability challenge, and government's job here is to make it affordable. One way or another, that's government's role. We'll do the technology bit. Government's role is to help us, to work with us, to make it affordable, so that people don't get left behind. And the EV thing is it's a reasonable analogy. But I think one of the things for me, for the UK particularly, Nathan, and you'll recognise this with the background that you and your family have had, is that it's really important for me that we don't end up sacrificing manufacturing jobs in the UK. We spent the whole of my life pretty well deindustrializing the UK, and that's very, very bad news, and that's beginning to bite us, because we can offshore the making of cars, we can offshore the making of washing machines or whatever. The one thing we can't offshore is the work we do to our own buildings. And so we need an on the tools workforce and a skilled on the tools workforce. And one of the elements of that is, we have been almost self-sufficient in the manufacturing of boilers in the UK for some time, and it would be a great shame if we were to lose that and lose some of those manufacturing jobs, sacrifice some of those on the back of imported heat pumps. So I do think that the steps that some of the boiler manufacturers have taken to start building heat pumps in the UK is good. It's a challenge because you've got some excess capacity across Europe in heat pump manufacturing capacities, and the businesses themselves are, certainly pan-European, if not pan-global.
Mm.
So it's not straightforward by any means, but I think we need to do everything we can, and government is trying. There are incentives around to support manufacturing. Whether they've quite got them right or not is another question. But we could build up, for instance, our commercial manufacturing heat pump base. We produce some really good commercial heat pumps in the UK. We've got some interesting firms. They're doing great things with natural refrigerants. So
Okay.
they're already taking the steps that are required to get down to almost zero global warming potential refrigerants and what have you. We could really do with supporting those sorts of industries and potentially the supply chain, because we need to manufacture more stuff over here.
So
So
we
that would be
come,
my one. That'd be my one plea. Apart from the government saying, "Look, just reduce the price of electricity and let us get on with it." It's reduce the price of electricity and let's do everything we can to support manufacturing industry to make the transition.
I totally agree with that. The trouble is, we now live in this world. I don't know anything about merger and acquisition and economics, but I do have merger and acquisition accountants do ask for meetings with me to get a very independent view on the industry. And like we've recently seen, you get these big mergers, and then these manufacturing factories over Europe can shut overnight. It's recently happened in Turkey. I'm not going to mention names, and it will happen again, and it will keep happening again because we are entering this like super merger acquisition. We've mentioned the big four, so I know people in your group that are looking at them big four and can buy them just like that. Because I suppose what people don't realise, yes, our fossil fuel boiler industry has been big, and worldwide it's been big, but the electronics industry is arguably bigger. So there are companies out there who make heat pumps and refrigeration equipment, which is everywhere on this planet, as we've all tried to help people understand. But they make washing machines, TVs, fridges. They make these are big, powerful entities. And like I say, they're looking at people like Valent. Wiesmann has already been bought by Cab, but that's not that hasn't as gone as well as people expected, and there's now other buyers looking at aspects. So all overnight, these factories. Now we probably arguably haven't seen it as much as some of the factories in Europe. Well, we have up in Scotland. That's. So yeah, we get to this stage where we want manufacturing, and then all of a sudden a big merger happens, and then bang, that all changes overnight, and people are getting moved around left, right, and centre. I mean, Wiesmann had so many people. One minute, I'm chatting to them for years and years, they're sort of core of Wiesmann, and then bang, they're not there. And this is going on. It's a big thing that's going on in this industry because, like I say, there's some very powerful big entities now that are just I don't know. I don't really understand that whole world of merger and acquisition. I don't know it at all. All I know is there's some very super giants now, and they're all very interested in buying things up, rah, rah, rah. And like I say, that affects people's working lives, like in manufacturing, whether in the R&D teams, technical sales teams, overnight they can lose jobs. And that is something I think this energy transition, which we need, is something we have to be aware of.
Of
And
course we do. Of course we do. But it's only by talking about these things
yeah,
that we will. If you don't talk about them, they're not on the table. So much better that we talk about them. I mean, we recognise the fact that actually we do need a manufacturing base, and that manufacturing base actually has significant societal benefit as well. And I think that
mm,
that's part of what we've lost. But anyway,
yeah,
look, I don't want to stray too much into the psychology of the UK industry. But I do think that there are some things that are complementary
mm.
to the energy transition that we should try and make sure we optimize as we're going through the whole process. So that we've always got one eye on what we're going to do, how we're going to deal with it. There are things around air quality, for example. The Treasury is reluctant to recognise the improvement in air quality because, sort of understandably, they say, well, we have all the cost in year one, but the NHS doesn't get the benefit until year 10. When we start seeing a reduction in cases of asthma or whatever it might be. But if you look at what's happened in London with ULEZ, it was said that if ULEZ was to be a success by 2030, the single biggest source of NOx and particulates in London would be the burning of gas. Well, actually, we've got there 5 years early because we've reached that point now. That's how successful ULEZ has been. And people have stopped raging about ULEZ. It was a very short-lived rage, wasn't it? Terrible, terrible, terrible. But actually now, the air quality in London is significantly improved. Now the biggest problem is the burning of gas for heat. So these transitions actually can start making a difference within living memory, as it were. I mean, ULEZ has only been around for, I don't know, what, 5, 10 years or something, and now it has made a difference, and it's made a measurable difference. So I think that when people start seeing and understanding those things that come as part of this transition away from the fossil fuel era, that's all. Those are just building blocks for me for getting people to a point where they're comfortable that everything they do is moving away from the idea of combusting things.
Emma, as an SME, what's your vantage point as an SME? Are you still getting lots of jobs coming in? Still sort of momentum there? Consumers, homeowners want this work?
I mean, I'm still here, Nathan. I think, you speak to a lot of installers. I speak to a lot of, frenemy installers. It's been steady, and MCS numbers will back me up on that, in terms of if you look at 2025 versus 2024 and the boiler upgrade scheme, MCS vouchers, there has been, a steadiness in that, but solar PV 2025 had the biggest increase for a couple of years. That people's, I guess it comes back to some of the points that the HPA UK are arguing and that Beam's already touched on, which is, my view is like your solar system might cost you 15 grand, and your heat pump might cost you 15 grand. There's still no real, there's not a lot of discussion in the general public about the return on investment on solar, which, by the way, can still be 10 to 20 years. But what happens is the minute you plug your solar in, you start on your app to see your free 28 pences. Ooh, that was free. Oh, look, all night, I'll generate this, you see it.
Yeah.
It is a benefit, whether it's going to, you have to have 28p's coming in for the next 25 years for you to get your return on investment. You see that immediately. It's like having a savings account where every half an hour somebody drops you 20p.
Oh, that'd be
Look
nice.
at that. Look at that. Look at that. It's going to take you 20 years for that 15 grand to get back in there, but you can see it and, your app tells you that. Whereas on the heat pump, it is a different sell. And right now, if people are coming to heat pumps for social good, if people are coming to heat pumps because they're at the right stage in a property plan where, why would you put gas in if they are looking to do the right thing, then that's a different sell to somebody going, well, will it save me money against a gas boiler? Now, the answer is yes, it can if you've got a well-designed, well-installed heat pump, which is what we, always try to. But, even a well-designed, well-installed heat pump, is pushing the bounds of a 4 to 5 times electric cost against gas in terms of, whether you're going to break even. And so, at that point, it's steady. Somebody come in and saying, I'll have it off you if you can guarantee you'll save me money. It's a difficult one. It is a difficult one. But, the answer is, well, it can bolt on another 15 grams worth of solar PV battery, and you've got the Holy Trinity, and then we're quids in. But where are you going to get the third? But then this is where some of the levers, the warm homes plan and having low and no cost loans for solar PV battery to top up the boiler upgrade scheme. That's something that's already been happening in Scotland with the HES loan, where you can get a grant and then a 0% interest-free loan to cover the difference. Those are the kind of things that unlock that, whilst we continue having the argument about the lowest carbon system being the lowest cost to run system. But yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of interest out there. It's just we're an industry that's also susceptible to a whole bunch of things. This is not an impulse buy. This is not 100 quid's worth of new trainers buy. This is a significant investment in that people are making.
You've got young kids like me, ain't you?
Yeah. It's these ones or none. So it's not that kind of buy. And right now there's a lot of what's going on in a macroeconomics. It's kind of got nothing on the one hand. It's got nothing to do with heat pumps. It's just people's general feeling about what's happening in the world, and should I keep my 15 grand in the bank rather than spend it on anything, just because I'm not quite sure. Maybe I should spend it on bog rolls and build myself a hideout in the back garden.
With a
Concept of
diesel
return
jet,
on investment.
with a diesel
Not
jet,
concept.
then generate, because that is happening. There are, I mean, I used to live in America, and the prepper community arguably started there, and it does seem. I mean, I don't watch a lot of news at all anymore, and it seems the prepper community is growing again in this country. And I know for a fact some of the rich people, they want diesel backup generators because they don't trust the electric grid. They've got solar. I mean, obviously solar makes a lot of sense, and battery storage makes a lot of sense. But I know a very rich entity that I'm actually not going to even say it. But yeah, so people that are worried about the world and where it's going. Oh, that's what I was going to ask you, Rick. AI. So do you guys get in discussions about AI? Because obviously some of your biggest players, biggest members are using AI, not just for in their sort of the business side of things, but and the technology they're using. What's your views on this AI thing? Because we're all of a generation where it's, Emma and I, like I say, we've got my daughter's 13. When she's our age, it's very, 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 very likely she's going to be walking around with humanoid type cyborg things that we could only envision on when we watched Blake Seven Bean or things like that,
And
sci-fi.
look, yeah, I mean, look, I mean, look at this.
Yeah, yeah,
More computing power in this than there was in the Apollo spacecraft
yeah.
that put astronauts on the moon.
Yeah.
So there's been massive change, and it's just going to continue to accelerate. There's that law about microchip capability is
Moore's law.
doubling every year or whatever it is. Quadrupling every year.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, AI is going to make a massive difference. I think our industry is already making use of it because a lot
mm,
of these
mm,
software tools are effectively they're learning. They're learning the way people are living in their homes, and they're changing commissioning and what have you. So it's being used. We got this other issue, of course, is how do we provide for all this AI stuff? And we've just had we're actually in the middle at the moment of the call for evidence from the Environmental Audit Committee on the development of data centres in the UK and the impact that that's going to have on grid, potential local employment, issues around waste heat, and all that stuff is. But the good news is they're actually talking about it and thinking about it before they start building the things.
mm,
And it would have been quite useful, wouldn't it, if we'd thought about building the pylons and the cables before we'd built the wind farms and the solar farms,
mm,
because we wouldn't then be paying curtailment
mm.
fees. So I think it's a good thing that we're looking to address these potential. I'm not going to call them problems because I don't think I don't think they're problems. I think it's we just need to make sure that we get these infrastructural decisions right, because everything about energy now is an infrastructural issue. It's a national infrastructural issue. Everything we do about energy, the whole energy transition, is about getting that integration between all of these things as close to perfect as we can. We're never going to get it perfect, but we've got to do everything we can to try and get it as close to perfect as we can, so that we don't start creating problems for ourselves. We've got a slight problem around West London at the moment with power supply and grid connections. We've got this massive queue in grid connections, partly because so many of the places in the queue were taken up by speculative opportunities that probably were never going to get built anyway. So I think we need to spend a lot more time trying to make sure that good decisions are made around the infrastructural piece, and that everything we do is that could be an asset is seen as an asset. So, a data center could be an asset for the energy system. It's going to take a lot. It's going to draw down a lot of electricity, but actually, it could be seen as an asset for the waste heat, and therefore for the heat network that's supplying, either the village down the road or the 70 hectares of glass house or whatever that's surrounding it. And I think we have to, if we're going to optimize the build out and the spend, we've got to try and make sure we think about these things as far in advance as we possibly can and get that whole integration piece correct. So I applaud the Environmental Audit Committee for wanting to get out and actually talk about these things before we start building them out. I mean, clearly we're building them already, but before we see the massive push, because as you saw in the industrial strategy from last year, the IS8 sectors that they want to see for the massive growth taking place, every single one of those IS8 sectors has got data sitting behind it one way or another. So every single one of them features data and data centers, storage, computing power, you name it. Years ago when I was, so between the cars and the heat pumps, I also spent some time in the computing industry. And one of my clients said to me, "Why is it that we need so much disk storage space? Why are we constantly having to buy more disk storage? Why are you selling us more disk storage?" And I say, "Well, it's very simple. When there was a hole in the road, you used to send out a man with a tape measure and a clipboard, and he would measure the hole, and he'd write one sheet of paper and sketch where it was and the sizes of the hole, and that would go in a filing cabinet. It's one piece of paper and a filing cabinet. Now you send out a team of people who take coordinates. It's all done on GPS. You probably video an impact assessment with a couple of drivers who've been in it. And suddenly it's no longer one piece of paper. It's now sort of half an hour of video that you're now storing. So that whole change about the way we use data and what have you. And we started almost, didn't we, by talking about the publication of data, making data available to support what our industry is doing domestically, of proving to people that actually the vast majority of these heat pump installations are delivering what our industry says they're delivering. So we shouldn't be shying away from data, and therefore we shouldn't be shying away from artificial intelligence.
No, and
I could do with some artificial intelligence, because as the older you get, the natural intelligence starts to fade away.
and on something, less multinational and massive, AI on an installer basis. Right now it helps me summarize reports. It's giving me loads of ways for me to review my own data. The tools, as Beans just said, some of the software tools that we've already got there, looking to the future, they'll be the self-commissioning heat pump. It'll be the self-diagnosing it. We've got that in some kind of form already, where it just beeps at the engineer and says, Mrs. Miggins's heat pump down the road is giving us this error. So, there's all that pre-triage. Maybe you can fix it at the desk. Maybe you don't have to go out at all. More maybe homeowner help thyself, so that they too can access things like, the installer menu and know how to clear an F2 fault, because they can access better AI images, data, videos. All of these things, I think, will, change the industry to some degree or another. But, and it was, something I saw a while ago, and it's been used lots of times, where the construction of a building, where they have those, this is what it's going to look like when it's finished over the scaff, and, the company had written, get AI to finish building this. And, we're still going to need for, my generation, next generation. I can't, I'm not seeing anytime soon anybody who's pipe bending in a plant room without a human intervention.
Well,
You know, I
you
don't.
we're probably not that far away from robots being better pipe benders, which brings us back to another topic we discussed at the beginning, because there's a lack of that going on now. It really is, but that's another issue. Guys and girls, it's so nice to have you come on. I'm a big fan of you both. You both work very, very hard in this industry, in this sector, and it's been a good discussion to hear what the Heat Pump Association UK. I've got to always remember to say the UK bit now at the end. Is doing, after the merger. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of my listeners for coming on the show. Thanks, Bean. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.